Chapter 9. Incidences now stood out more distinctly and lingered in Waterlily's memory so that she could recall them with nearly the same immediacy as when they actually happened, and could feel the same sensations they had first aroused. 3 of these were events that had to do with her brother Little Chief, to whom she was especially devoted. When he first struck coup, when he ran away and joined a war party, when he killed his first buffalo. These were deeds that made her very proud of him, as a sister should be. It was a cold late spring after a particularly severe winter. No buffalo had been sighted yet, and meantime the store of food was fast running out. As usual at such times, it was up to the heads of families to go out hunting individually for whatever they could find. Rainbow and a cousin with whom he especially enjoyed hunting decided to go out to search of deer, taking their immediate families with them. With the cousin were his wife and 2 of her nephews, who were old enough to help, and Rainbow's mother went with his family. They were lucky, for deer hunting proved worthwhile in the locality they had chosen. The men were out all day, while the women kept busy taking care of the previous day's kill. But in the evenings they gathered around the common outdoor fire between the 2 teepees, where they cooked and ate together. It was a typical deer hunting feast, for each individual was able to hold his slender limb of bone of deer in his hand and pry out enough marrow for each mouthful of meat, and that was considered a great luxury. The sharp flavor of fresh sticks with which they pried enhanced the taste like a condiment. It was while they sat after such a meal wrapped in fur robes, for the nights were chilly, that suddenly a bird began to call from the nearby bushes, interrupting the informal conversation. After this happened twice, the cousin's wife remarked, "That is a posca whippoorwill, isn't it? I did not know they sang at this time of year." After that, the conversation went on. The bird's call no longer noticed. Only Rainbow was disturbed by an idea, so he could no longer engage in carefree talk. Instead, he waited momentarily for the next call, holding his empty marrow bone poised. At last, it was again. Hurling the bone toward the bushes, he called out, "Pasqua, where?" The song stopped instantly. The cousin laughed. The cousin said laughingly, "That finished him, and now we won't be interrupted again." But all night long Rainbow lay awake. Why didn't the bird fly to another spot and sing again? Could I have actually hit him so blind an aim? He wondered. A vague suspicion nagged at him, and he could hardly wait for the dawn. As soon as he could see, he stole out of the teepee and went toward the source of the bird's call. Just as he had thought, it had not been a bird at all. It had been a man. A crow scout lay at the edge of the timber with a bone penetrating his temple. It had been a direct hit. Rainbow was a hunter, not a warrior, and he had never killed a man before. Nevertheless, he knew, as all men did, that the formal announcement followed a certain routine. He gave some startling war whoops that brought everyone out of the teepees in time to hear him say, "I whom you designate as Rainbow, I this day have killed my enemy in a direct hit." It was what warriors always shouted. As the others came, dragging fur robes behind them, he hurried to his teepee, brushing past them to arouse his son Little Chief. "Stand aside," he commanded, "stand aside, for it is my wish that the lad strike first coup." He led the drowsy boy to the scene, teaching him what to do. Accordingly, Little Chief touched the dead man gingerly on the shoulder with his bow. Simple as that act was, it was a tremendous thing for him, though he was not aware of it. Before he was 15 winters old, he had killed an enemy, and that was an honor that came to very few at so young an age. Rainbow invited his cousin to strike second coup, and the elder of the 2 nephews to strike third. Then he struck fourth, and that was all that counted. The younger nephew stood watching diffidently, satisfied that his brother had been given the honor. Then the 2 men together cheered for Little Chief, in the traditional words of praise, Little Chief Eyahe. It was indeed something to cheer about. Of course, the entire matter was formal, a vicarious honor for a vicarious deed, yet it was no less meaningful for the boy's record. Bluebird took Little Chief to one side and whispered to him, "Do not forget this, son. Do not forget that you have a father who is so unselfish as to transfer the honor he has earned to his son. It is because he wants you to get top glory. Such a deed is praiseworthy. You are fortunate to have such a father." The dead scout was handsome, tall, and well-knit, and best of all, his trappings indicated that he had been a person of note back home. That made the deed even more gratifying, for this warfare of the plains was a perpetual tournament between the tribes, wherein they complemented one another by being worthy foes. There was less pride in vanquishing an ordinary man as an opponent. Warriors went as far as to dress in their very best before an open battle. From their youth up, they had been reminded to be a worthy foe, and that was understood not only to mean brave, crafty, strong, but also, just as much, to look the part. But the victors could not stand there long admiring the dead man. Here was a scout from an enemy war party. If he did not promptly return, the others would come searching for him. The hunting party was in great danger. Rainbow gave rapid orders. There is no time to lose. Let the women save only the meat that is dry and light and compact for carrying. Forget the teepees. We have others at home. And you, turning to his cousin and the two boys, take the women and children and ride quickly away. Skirting the hills on the west, since apparently the scout had come from the east, they dashed away. When they were beyond the hills, Rainbow stopped and dismounted, and the others came to a halt. Keep straight north along this ravine. He knew the lay of that part of the land well. Stay out of sight, race your horses to the limit. As they galloped away, he tied his horse to a stump hidden by tall brush and crawled on his belly all the way to the top of the hill, where he could see the abandoned camp. For some time he lay watching, motionless, holding a bunch of sage over his head. His legs were thrust far under a sage bush, and he was one with the land. No one could have said a man lay there. Sure enough, he saw a war party moving along the high ridge beyond the camp. They stopped. They had seen the camp. On signal, they charged it, racing downhill with shrill cries and shooting arrows into the empty teepees. In a moment, they were tearing them apart. Rainbow did not wait for them to find comrade. When he reached home, his horse was white with foam, its flanks working like powerful bellows. Already the whole camp circle was buzzing with the report brought in by his party, and his name was being lauded to the skies. He had ingeniously killed an enemy and had saved his party, and without doubt also other hunting parties in that region. Members of the Kit Fox Society had already gone out to warn them and to bring them in. But best of all, to Rainbow, was the praise for his son. "Little Chief has struck first coup," was the general cry. "With so auspicious a start, he will surely become a great warrior," old men prophesied of him. All of this was highly exciting to Waterlily. At the next dance, she knew, the incident would be marked in many ways. Little Chief's aunts and his mother, Bluebird, would outdo themselves at the giveaway in his name. It would all be very wonderful. It was also personally important to Waterlily in a unique way. Gloko had already explained that she, as a sister of a warrior, was the proper person to carry the scalp in the victory procession. That she said was always the prerogative of a hero sister. For days on end, Waterlily enjoyed a delicious torment in anticipation of her coming role. She would be so proud to carry the decorative pole with the trophy mounted away up there at the top. But could she endure the gaze of so many spectators? She remembered a legend about a sensitive youth who was knocked down physically by the mere concentration of all eyes on him. Might that happen to her? It would be too dreadful. For Waterlily was fast becoming bashful. as a well-trained young girl was expected to be. At the age of 10 winter, she was already reticent and demure from watching the conventional behaviors of her cousin Liebingfawn and other girls older than herself, taking her cue from them, not independently had she done this, but because she had also been admonished in that direction. The loud, bold girl is not approved, Gloku would say. Waterlily saw that this meant Alila, specifically. Alila, for all her warmth and friendliness, was loud and bold. Instinctively, Waterlily knew enough not to copy her. At last she confided in Gloku. Grandmother, I think I'm too young to be in the procession with grown-ups. Gloku could see that, much as the girl was elated over the idea, she would be more comfortable not to claim her right at this time. Well, perhaps you are, she soothed her, but don't worry. There will be other opportunities, for your brother will be a real warrior someday. His feet are set in that direction. In the end, it was Bluebird who carried the trophy in her daughter's place. To have the right was enough for Waterlily. She could take quiet pride in that. Rainbow had gone after deer, not enemies, as everyone knew. Even so, his accidental deed merited the same recognition as a deed intentionally achieved. A war deed was a war deed, no matter what. That early sampling of military glory did things to Little Chief. He found it hard to wait until he could legitimately join a war party. Perhaps in 4 or 5 years, his grandfather had said. It seemed an intolerable time to wait while doing commonplace things again. So he took matters into his own hands and got his taste of battle much earlier. Of all things, he joined a war party that was setting out in anger, determined on reprisal. Early that following fall, the enemy struck with unbelievable boldness during a peaceful night. Stealing right into the camp circle, they wantonly scalped 3 children and spirited away a young girl as she lay asleep. In addition, they took the best horses, though the owners had them picketed near their teepees. The camp circle was in an uproar at dawn when the losses were discovered. There was a universal wailing for the dead children and the disappearance of the young girl. Their parents and relatives mutilated themselves recklessly in their grief. Meantime, the warriors were assembling in anger to start forth after the offenders. The master warrior, Bearheart, had already rallied them. Men, he said to his followers, this is an insult that we must avenge with our lives if need be. Are you with me? Then bestir yourselves. I wait. And while he sat on the grass and smoked in ominous calm, it was Little Chief who broke in on his silence. Uncle, I'm going with you. The boy's eyes were blazing with eagerness, but Bearheart did not laugh him off. One must not ridicule young ambition for fear of killing it. He puffed away for some time and then said, I have to say no for a good reason. This is no trip for you, my nephew. This is an angry errand, a determined one. Unless you are victorious, we mean to die on the battlefield. There may be no one to bring you back safely. The boy said nothing, but his silence was more insistent than pleading. Uncle had to say more. If this were to be the usual kind of warpath, a mere seeking after adventure for the sport and glory of it, then I would say yes. But let me make you a promise. When next I go on such a warpath, you shall go with me. Thank you, Uncle. The boy slipped away. The war party started at noon and traveled all night. The next evening, it being still within Dakota country, the men stopped to rest for a while and sent 2 young men to fetch water and fuel for cooking a meal. When those 2 returned, they brought Little Chief in. How he had followed and managed to evade their constant lookout was a puzzle. Only of the young men had stumbled on him lying in the bush where he had gone to pick up some wood. They stood him before Bearheart, who smoked on as though not seeing him. At last he looked earnestly at the boy. Ah, my nephew, this was what I did not want, for I needed freedom from personal care. I meant for nothing to impede me seeking revenge, but now I must worry over your safety at the same time. However, you are here now, and you shall go on. We can spare no one to take you back. As it turned out, Little Chief proved himself very useful to the expedition, though he was not permitted to see the actual fighting. They left him behind in a hidden spot some distance from the enemy's camp to take care of the relief horses and the food and extra supplies of the war party. The trip was a complete triumph, for there had been reprisal killings of the enemy in hand-to-hand fights. All the stolen horses were recovered, and many of the enemy's finest were taken in addition. Best of all, the young girl was rescued unharmed from the lodge of the chief, where she had been taken in adoption in place of a daughter recently died. The party rode hard day and night until they were once more in familiar country. There they stopped, being fairly certain of not being followed, and feasted on parts of fresh buffalo meat from a stray animal killed on the way. For Little Chief, it was a thrill merely to sit among the warriors, to hear them recount around the campfire the details of their individual struggles with the enemy. There were many further things he wanted to know, but he hesitated to draw attention to himself, knowing too well that he was there on sufferance only, still an unnecessary burden. It had all proved to be more wonderful and terrifying than he and his companions back home had ever imagined from hearing war tales. For a while the battle raged, and the cries and shouts of struggle reached him in his retreat. He had been badly scared, and the enormity of his step in tagging after this war party had come to him with frightening impact for the first time. It had been so presumptuous of him. However, he felt better with a seasoned warrior, when a seasoned warrior, during the talk by the campfire, laid a hand on his shoulder and said, "What would we have done without this fine lad? We owe him so much, my friends, for it was he who enabled us to leap from our spent horses to fresh ones, all without slackening speed." That was somewhat exaggerated, of course, but Little Chief did have everything packed and ready to go, so that when the warriors came, they could start homeward immediately. He felt better. In fact, he began to fancy himself quite a warrior, little knowing what still lay ahead of him, the initiation test regularly given to a boy who stole out on the warpath as he had done. First they sent him for water at night and expected him to find his way through the dark and dangerous woods to the stream. And when he brought it to them, they rejected it and sent him back for more. "This is not the water I wanted," they said after tasting it, and spat it out contemptuously. 3 times they did this, and only accepted the water he brought the 4th time, though he got it all from the same spot. This last water they passed around, sampling it in turn and exclaiming, "Ah, this is it. Boy, why did you not bring it before?" Next, when they stopped at noon, they sent him on a scouting mission. "Boy, now go about the surrounding hills. See what you can see that we should know." So he ran over the low-lying hills and the ravines and returned with a report that there were deer tracks near a watering hole, and that there were evidences of a recent camp beyond one of the hills. The 2 young men sent to verify these statements returned to say they were both correct, that there had been a campfire very recently put out, with the embers still warm. And for proof of the deer tracks, one of the riders brought back the deer slung over the back of his horse. Little Chief felt his prestige soaring as he heard the men's praises. But it was not until the warriors had conferred certain awards on him, just before they reached home, that he was completely happy, feeling that he belonged. The awards were the proofs of his success. One was the stick with a little bag attached in which he brought the water. The other was a cluster of feathers, which the warriors called the flutterers. The man who awarded him the water carrier said, "Take this wand as proof of your courage. It shall be your first war standard. To it you will attach trophies you win in the future. Observe that it is of ash. Ash is strong. Though it may bend, it will not readily break. So, be like the ash, resilient. The water cup is made from the sheath of a buffalo's heart. It says, be hospitable. You will notice the wolf's tail dangling from the wand. It is the warrior symbol. A warrior shall be friends with the wolf, for he is the chief warrior. He knows the hills and the valleys of the land. He knows where to hide and how to fight. From him you can learn many things. Observe the crow feathers on the wand. The crow is a bird that flies straight and far and does not lose its way. If you should be a warrior, if so should a warrior go unerringly. Take the wand, and you have earned your water carrier. It was his own uncle Berhard who next awarded him the flutterers. They were 4 long feathers trimmed to their naked quill and tightly bound together at the base with a cord of sinew. The tiny fans left on at the tips were the finest barbs that caught the air and remained in continuous motion. Little Chief had never heard of flutterers before, much less seen one. Boys who sneaked after a war party were rare, and those who passed the test were rarer still. Handing the award to him, Berhard said, "Take this, my boy. It is the symbol of scouting. Keep it always, and from it learn to be superhumanly aware. Note that the tips are a tremble, even on the stillest days when men of duller senses feel no movement of air. So should a true scout be, ever more alert and aware than others." The man spoke with great solemnity. With such tangible proofs of a successful warpath, Little Chief was no longer afraid to get home. He had felt right along that his people must be worrying about his absence, but now he was sure that they would forgive all. He hoped his father would approve and would say, "It is admirable to sample warfare. It is well to be off to a good start so young. It is a privilege to go under the able tutelage of the great Berhard." Raymond did not say precisely those words, but he was glad that it all turned out as it did. At the victory dance to celebrate the success of the reprisal journey, Little Chief actually walked with warriors, while his relatives, especially his aunts, gave many gifts in his name and cheered him again and again. When Waterlily was in her 12th winter, the third important honor came to her brother. He killed his first buffalo. The morning a blizzard was raging outside, making the teepees very dark as though it were still night. Nobody wanted to get up. Since no work was possible indoors or out, it seemed just as well to sleep the day away. But then, suddenly, there were excited voices outside, men shouting to one another from teepee to teepee. But what they were saying was incoherent against the noise of the storm, and those in the teepees caught only snatches at first. Gradually, however, it came to light that a herd of buffalo, blinded by the storm, had walked right into the camp and were discovered at dawn, roaming aimlessly among the scattered winter teepees, just like domesticated animals. And what a welcome accident that was! Men hastily organized to drive them onto open ground away from the teepees and to hold them there, if possible, until the others could get ready for the chase. Make haste, the village crier went about shouting. Of their own accord, our brothers, seeing we are in need, have again come to feed us. Bring your sharp knives for the butchering. Listening to the commotion, Waterlily was glad she was a girl and could remain cozy in bed. The poor men who must go out to chase in weather like this. And then she heard her father Rainbow outside the grandparents' teepee, where they slept. In urgent words, he began calling Little Chief, who also slept in the teepee, to get up and to come outside. "Wake up, my son, wake up. Only women be excused for lying curled up at a time like this. Emil must expect to bang his skull to earth a time or two. Remember your sister and cousins. Doubtless they would be cheered by a bowl of hot buffalo soup. So come, today calls for men." Waterlily could hear her brother scrambling to a sitting position and hurriedly putting on his clothes, saying nothing back to his father, only breathing very hard and audibly through his teeth. For it was cold. He was not balking. He knew his father was right. This kind of thing was his destiny. Waterlily lay very still, with her face to the wall as teepee etiquette dictated, and with eyes tightly shut for good measure. It was not only bad manners, but also a lack of kinship obligation to look at another getting up or dressing, especially a brother. Gloku also got up and sat leaning forward from her sitting space to blow on her fire again and again, coaxing the damp wood to catch. Her eyes wrinkled shut again against the smoke from the sluggish fire. Between blowings, she hurled out complaints in behalf of Little Chief. But he is only a lad yet. He is too young to take part in a winter chase. Rainbow ignored his mother's interference. If indeed he heard, instead he called again, "Hurry, the herd will get out of hand while we crawl about. Let's be on our way." He could be heard readily rettling his buffalo ponies as he talked. "Son," Gloku called louder, "at least let the boy stop long enough to drink some soup. I will have it warmed up at once." But Rainbow called back impatiently, "Mother, don't pamper the boy. He is old enough and he is a male. Remember that. Send him out at once." Little Chief rushed out of the teepee, trailing his robe after him. That was the last seen of him, until he returned late in the day, bedraggled and chilled to the bone, but with his first buffalo. Gloku at once cooked the tongue and considered the choicest part, and served it as in a right to the boy's respect relatives, Waterlily, Leaping Fawn, and Prairie Flower, for whom the boy had, as it were, risked his life. His father was quietly pleased, but his blind grandfather was boisterously proud, as he began naming off a list of his cronies whom he wished as guests to eat the boy's first kill. Nor were they slow in coming. Singingly, or in genial groups, they began to arrive, each one carrying his eagle-wing fan, which was standard equipment for old men, both summer and winter, and his long-stem pipe, and his pouch containing a blend of tobacco and kinnick, for wherever old men foregathered, each must play the host in turn by filling his pipe and sending it around. It was the custom from old that the man on the left lit it and puffed on it leisurely 2 or 3 times before handing it to the one on his left. The pipe always traveled clockwise around a circle of friends, the host smoking it last. The aged guests seated themselves with some delay, deferring to one another with a "you sit there, friend, no, you," with courteous dignity as became friends, while they drank a great deal of rich meaty soup, enjoying it noisily, and chewed laboriously such meat as they had teeth for. They praised the boy's achievement highly. It was gratifying to Little Chief to watch them enjoying the food he had made possible. When the old men had eaten their fill and started the pipe around, they fell to recounting their own first hunting experiences, while Little Chief listened with his eyes shining. He knew what they were talking about. After a little, one of the guests turned to him. "And now, grandchild, let us hear how you got your first buffalo." Confident because he had something to relate, the boy cleared his throat in preparation and began. "Well, it all began this way. There I was, cozy in bed and very sleepy still, when the old man called out a hint that I was acting like a woman by staying in bed. Of course that brought me instantly to a sitting position. Of course, the guest said. What man would ignore that?" The boy went on talking, as a man among men who had hunted the buffalo. "Out there in the open I was so blinded by the whipping snow that I did not know where I was. Then I faintly made out the rump of the beast running away. Just as I set an arrow to my bow, a gust of wind jerked my robe off partly, but because it was tied to me around my neck, the rope only flattened out behind me, choking me more and more the harder I rode. The wind cut through my naked body and smacked against my face, making my eyes water till I could not see, for the ice quickly formed on my lashes. I tell you, it was hard, but somehow I managed to separate one animal from the herd, and as he ran I shot 2 arrows into him, which made him stumble again and again, though he was tough enough to keep going. But I knew I had him, that sooner or later he would fall. So I jumped off to rub my hands in snow, for I had lost all feeling in them. Then I shot again, running up to him as he weaved and staggered, and then he fell dead. Through his recital the guests sat tense, but as soon as it was ended they rubbed their palms together, as they always did, to denote satisfaction, and one or another placed a hand over his mouth in the gesture of wonderment and admiration, exclaiming, "Splendid, grandson, you did well." The boy went on. Soon 2 men appeared out of the grayness. They were my father here, and one other, and they carried sticks for the fire. While I warmed myself, they threw my robe back on me. It had slipped off when the tie broke, but I was colder with it on than without it, for in that short while the shaggy fur had become packed with snow. It was very bad, I tell you. When Little Chief said that last, he quickly dipped and then turned his head to the side with a jerk, by the way of emphasis, a manner that boys and young men affected. "I'm sure it was," the grandfather agreed in a trembling voice. Then he turned to his guests and said proudly, "But note, my friends, he got what he went after, his buffalo." The guests cried in a chorus, "He did indeed."